Now, our closing keynote speaker is going to remind us of why it is critically urgent to address patient safety today. I want to please welcome back Michelle Martin back to the stage to introduce our closing keynote. Thank you.
Wow, it really has been a wonderful day, and I always walk away a little inspired and motivated. I hear these moving stories, and there's just so much we can do. And now I have the honor to introduce our closing keynote, former U.S. Congressman Rob Andrews, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 24 years. Congressman Andrews currently serves as the CEO of Health Transformation Alliance, HTA. In that role, he oversees the strategic direction of 50-plus major corporations who have come together in the alliance to do one thing: fix our broken healthcare system. Leapfrog is a proud member of HTA, and prior to HTA, leading government affairs practice at Dilworth Paxson Law Firm, President Barack Obama praised Andrews' service as an original author of the Affordable Care Act and a vital partner to its passage and implementation, and cited his tenacity and skill in representing the people of New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Rob Andrews to the stage.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yeah. Inspired and motivated. People of a certain age might remember a TV lawyer named Perry Mason. And there have been remakes of Perry Mason since then. For those of you who don't know who Perry Mason was, he was a defense attorney who represented those accused of committing a crime. And not only would he get his client acquitted in the trial, but in every trial he would also get the real murderer to confess on the stand. I went to law school for this reason, because I thought you could do this. Perry Mason could not hold a candle to Leah Binder when it comes to the indictment that she marched us through earlier this morning. If you put a broken health system on trial, and you talk about chances being 1 out of every 4 to have a safety problem, 3 Super Bowl stadiums filled of deaths in 1 year. There's not a jury in the world that wouldn't come back about a half an hour later and say to the U.S. healthcare system, guilty as charged. Leah, it was a compelling, moving, disturbing presentation that you gave. Just put this in context for a moment. Those of us who flew here, I flew from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm not very smart to leave Phoenix, Arizona for anywhere, but I did for this because I love Leapfrog. But if I'd gotten on that plane last night and they said American Airlines is very proud of our safety record, only 1 out of every 4 of our flights has a problem. And yeah, we filled 3 Super Bowl stadiums last year with casualties of those problems. I'm getting off the plane really quickly. I don't see auto manufacturers advertising the fact that only 1 out of every 4 car owners has a disastrous experience driving the car. It's unbelievable. So if the problem is so real and Leah's presentation was so compelling, why do we still have the problem? Why is this conference very appropriately called urgent to call us to action? Now, usually at this point, a lot of people will say, well, they want to get into a list of whose fault it is. This being Washington is like the national sport here. In soccer these days, and it is soccer, we have the World Cup. The whole world's following the World Cup. In Washington, the version of the World Cup is, whose fault is it? And there's been 40 or 50 years of whose fault it is that this system exists the way that it does. And it leads a lot of people to the thought that, well, it's a problem that just can't be solved. I believe in my DNA, those people are wrong. This is a problem that can be solved, that you are a part of solving every day. And just as Leah finished her presentation with an overview of the pathway out and a very striking piece of evidence that since 2010, when frankly she all too modestly mentioned that the Leapfrog scores became a huge tool in transparency. This organization should be shouting that from the housetops. It's an amazing achievement. But when that transparency became the blockbuster drug, and it began to rule the day, and you could put up billboards that said you got an A rating. When that all started to happen, you saw that graph that broken down by disease category and problem, the number of problems began to drop precipitously. We have a lot of work to do, and it can drop by a lot more. That's the urgency of the moment to make sure that happens. Because the Gall family and the families I'm sitting with here, your mom, the Murphy family, the bar isn't low enough yet because of what happened to them and what's happening to people all over the country. So I think that clearly Leah has laid out that we have a crisis of care and there's a path forward to fix it. I want to talk about that path forward in terms of two other crises that we have to wrestle with. The first is a crisis of substance, and the second and perhaps more difficult one is a crisis of the spirit. Crisis of substance, crisis of the spirit. The crisis of substance is that this is an overwhelming problem to fix the U.S. healthcare system. Anyone who claims there is a simple solution, just give me an hour and I can do this or that, is delusional and just misleading. And I see the nodding of the heads. This reminds me of, people who, I could fix that problem in a minute. I could teach kids to read easily. Just let me in the classroom. Said someone who's never spent 5 minutes in front of a first grade classroom. It's really hard to teach kids how to read. It's really hard to sell real estate, particularly in this market. So whenever someone from outside the profession says how easy it is to do something, they're usually dead wrong, and that's really the case here. This is an overwhelming problem because it's been with us for a long time. I want to read you a statement from the President of the United States. Of all the questions which can come before this nation, short of the actual preservation of its existence in a great war, there is none which compares in importance with the great central task of leaving an even better land to our descendants than it was for us. The President said, let me add that the health and vitality of our people are at least as well worth conserving as their forests, waters, lands, and minerals. And in this great work of preserving health, the national government must bear an important part. That was not Joe Biden. It was President Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt, who said that over 100 years ago. So this problem that you have devoted your lives and your careers to is not easy to solve. And anyone who comes along and says it is, I think, is disrespecting your work and deceiving the public. Now, because we're in Washington, and Washington's most priceless export is controversy, I thought that we might talk about what some of the problems are in terms of why this is such a difficult problem to solve. The first one is that just defining the problem is really hard. If we were to fill this room with liberals and conservatives and reds and blues, first of all, you'd have a definition problem of ideology. There are some people who say, well, the problem is The market runs too much. The huge insurance companies, the for-profit hospitals, the drug companies, they're all greedy. They're all overreaching, and they're the problem. Let's get rid of them. Then there'd be others who would say, no. The problem here is that government does too much. And when Medicare and Medicaid started to interfere in the marketplace, things got all out of whack. And so there's an ideological, you could fill this room up with half would say, let's have a single-payer health system where the government fixes the price of everything. And another half would say, no, let's get government out of health care altogether. Let's have some sort of market-based system where maybe people have a voucher, maybe they don't, and they buy their insurance that way, and everything in between. So there's this panoply of conflict about that. Then there's a conflict over strategy. I'm in the camp that says the best strategy to get better results out of the U.S. healthcare system is to pay people to do a good job. I think that if you run an MRI center and I run an MRI center, and you get the diagnosis right 98% of the time, and I get it right 90% of the time, but I do twice as many tests a week as you do, I don't think I should make twice as much money as you do. I think you should make more than I do because you got a better outcome. I'm in that camp, value-based purchasing. But there's another camp. You know, the fee-for-service has developed sort of baggage, but there's an argument here that having enough revenue, if I were the CFO of a hospital system, and one of you came into me and said, Rob, I've got a great idea. Starting tomorrow morning, we're going to do all of our contracts at risk, everything value-based, and stop charging people fee-for-service. I'd fire the guy right away, probably. Because the revenue model that helps me continue to deliver babies and transplant hearts and give chemotherapy treatments, that's how I pay for it. So before we start, sort of labeling fee-for-service as bad in all cases forever for everyone, we got to understand that's the way the system works right now. It's how Medicare works largely right now. And that so I don't think you can just jettison this and say it's an easy thing to do. There's a crisis in rural America. It has been for a very long time. My friend from Nashua, New Hampshire talks about only 2 hospitals in the area. They're kind of got one more in a lot of other areas where there's only 1 hospital in town. And if you said to that one hospital, sorry, no more fee-for-service, they'd say, okay, no more hospital. I'm not sure how that really helps the problem either. So there's a disagreement about strategy, and there's a disagreement about tactics. Some people believe that the right strategy is to lobby the Congress to do the right thing, and I embrace that. I think that's valuable work. Others think the right strategy is to bring together scholars and thinkers and researchers and write papers that talk about ways these problems can be solved. And I value that work. I read it. I respect it. I understand how important it is. And in others, and HGA would put ourselves in this camp, we believe in practical actions by using our purse. We have 58 corporations, our members, JP Morgan Chase, Boeing, Marriott, Coca-Cola, DuPont, American Express, Bank of New York, Mellon, Caterpillar, and collectively our members spend about $30 billion a year in the U.S. healthcare system. What we're trying to do is put as much of that $30 billion behind better outcomes. No one here wants their mom to get the cheapest mammogram. We don't either. We're really not, people say, well, reference-based pricing. Let's just say we're only going to pay 110% of Medicare for this or that. When I'm thinking about my wife or my daughters or my mother-in-law having care, I'm not really looking for the cheapest bargain. I'm looking for the best result because I love them. I want to take care of them. And that's really what our approach is all about. So there's a disagreement about tactics. There are people who would say about us, that's not really the right way to do this. And others might say, you can write all the white papers you want. It doesn't change anything. That's not true, but people say it. And then, lobbying the Congress, what's the use? They're not going to change anything every time anywhere. So you got that whole argument. It'd be as if Leah convinced the jury to convict the guy, and then they have to think about what happens to him next. And some people want, put him in jail for the rest of his life. Others want to make him commissioner of health of the state that he lives in. I mean, there's all different positions people would take on this, and that's what this tactic thing is all about. So there's that problem. Then there's the problem of how to just start to talk about solutions. And one of the things I would urge you to say about Leapfrog and why it's such an important solution to this problem of substance is because Leapfrog has a great answer for every single one of those ideological and tactical points that I just made. In a city of divisiveness, Leapfrog is a unifier. Because I sat behind on the plane last night a very conservative Republican congressman from Arizona, kind of redundant, and he's going to assume chairmanship of the Health Committee, the Ways and Means Subcommittee. So I was talking to him about it. His name is David Schweiker. He was just reelected. He's a free market conservative. And he asked me, where I was going. I'm now his constituent. So I said, none of your business. No, I told him where I was going. And I said, he didn't know about Leapfrog. And I said, Dave, in a system where there was more of a free market and more individual decisions about health care, you really need high value and transparent information about where the good health care is, don't you? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he got it. So if his vision were to come true, which probably would be a libertarian type system where everyone would not get care from their employer, they would choose where they want to go. There'd probably be vouchers and subsidies for people lower income, and that's how it would work, sort of like the Pell Grant system for college. He'd be a supporter of Leapfrog for that reason. I was sworn into Congress the same day Bernie Sanders was. There's an argument of which of us has done better over the years, but Bernie, is single payer, has been forever. And if I said, Bernie, if we had single payer tomorrow, Medicare for all, wouldn't we want to know where someone ought to go to have that Medicare dollar spent? Wouldn't you want to know who had a great safety record for chemotherapy, for sepsis? Wouldn't you want to know that so that when people could go anywhere, they go the place that's safest? Yeah, I think you'd be totally on board for that. If we're talking about this value-based versus fee-for-service, fee-for-service, one way or another, builds in the cost of error. Really does. So if a hospital system has a lot of malpractice settlements and has to spend a lot of money in regulation, one way or another it gets built into the price. So you do want to know how you stand so you can build it into your price. If it's fee for value, my goodness, the very definition of value is what were the results. If you want to terrify some of these health company startups, so they're all over the place from Silicon Valley, ask them if they've ever taken care of a patient and what happened. They all come in with a whiteboard and a PowerPoint and tell you they're going to change the world, they're going to help people, and a lot of them have great ideas, but they haven't ever served a patient or produced a result. We've got a great weight loss program. Well, how many people have used it? Well, none yet, but it's really going to work after you give us $10 million more. I mean, so people need transparency in that field as well. And when it comes to tactics, what better way to see if something works or not, to see if it works or not? It talked about, and then the panel was talking about a what's your plan. I, God willing, would like to come back and see that bar higher on the last graph that Leah used, where the 2010 versus now. I'd love to see actually lower, the accident rate be lower. So Leapfrog literally is a leap across this chasm of controversy. It is a way to leap between the liberals and the conservatives, the red and the blue, the fee for value, the fee for service, the white paper writers, the lobbyists, the let's spend our dollars. We all need Leapfrog. And so I would suggest that when you're talking to anybody who fits in any one of those camps and they ask you, why are you a part of this? The answer is because you can't do what you want to do without it. Without it. So how does then Leapfrog matter to the players that are in the system that we have? I thought the last discussion about providers was awesome that the panel was engaging in here, because there's a knee-jerk reaction to say, oops, if I'm a hospital system, I'm going to get evaluated. I don't like that. I want everybody to be pass-fail. Or maybe I just want to get a participation trophy for showing up. I don't like this idea about getting a grade. The smart providers eschew that notion, and they want to be evaluated because they want to get better. And I do think it's a wonderful, one of the participants in the back talked about how, I guess in Florida, the hospital association wanted to do this, and it was a key relationship mattered, but the basis of that relationship was, we want to be known as people who are trying to get better at what we do. That's a pretty cool reputation to have. I don't see many products get advertised that say, we're really happy with where we are now, we're never going to get any better. Buy our car. You know, we build tract homes in suburban America. This is all you're going to get, not going to get any better than this. Who advertises that way? And let's face it, they all are advertising. You know, you watch any sports event and all the signs on the court side and the wall, the outfield, are all this hospital, that one. It's like they didn't used to compete. They used to have like dinner dances and golf tournaments. Now they're putting ads up to get more market share. Well, okay. In that world, saying that we're not afraid to be evaluated because we want to get better all the time, that's a smart provider system. And it's also, look, have you ever met a person, I've met a lot of them in politics, but have you ever met a person who says, I don't want to hear any criticism myself? I'm great just the way I am right now. Would you hire that person? Would you marry that person? If they were your child, what would you do? I mean, I'm great. I don't need to be evaluated. Who thinks that way? So I want to go to any kind of provider, whether it's a healthcare provider, a lawyer, an accountant, home builder, who's always ready to get better. So providers, it's a little scary, and I will tell you that I do understand unfair ratings are wrong. I'm not competent to evaluate the cardiology department at Banner Health System in Arizona, so I never will. I'm not competent to evaluate anything they do. But to say that I'm not competent doesn't mean that somebody else isn't. And if peer cardiologists, driven by data, using a transparent method, want to rate Banner versus Honor versus Mayo versus whomever else is in the Arizona market, I would think the providers should welcome that. And to those providers who do, I think they deserve our praise. For those who do not yet, I think they deserve our coaching, as my friend Linda talked about, as New Jersey does. New Jersey is a very genteel state in all ways, sort of. And for those who reject this, let's tell the world. These folks over here don't want to be evaluated. They've got the world by the tail. They're just fine. Okay, let consumers make a choice about where they go. You want to talk about carriers. And I appreciate the fact that carriers are helping to underwrite this effort here. It's great. It's laudable. It's praiseworthy. I hope it continues. Look, no matter how the insurance industry gets sliced and diced, it's always going to make more sense for carriers to get good results than bad ones. And to the extent that there is transparency that drives the way carriers behave, I think that, again, Leapfrog can be a bridge to that. Consumers, actual people who don't get mentioned as often as they should in this, you know, if I wanted to get rid of my, my phone, which if Apple's listening, I do not, they certainly are listening. They're listening. Alexa probably is already saying to my wife, oh, buy what we have. You can't even say that woman's name anymore, can you? I have a niece named Alexa. When she calls us on the phone, we say hello. This other voice comes in. I'm going to have to talk to Bezos about this. But if I want to get rid of my phone tonight and replace with something else, the internet is full of information about what I can do. How much storage I get, how often I can get a free phone, what my monthly charge is. I mean, I could spend the next 2 weeks researching this. If I had to have my spine fused, first of all, there's lots of people eager to give me a spinal fusion, whether I need one or not. That's a whole different rap. But if I needed a spinal fusion, how am I going to find out about this? How am I going to know the spinal surgeon who's done 4 surgeries in her career versus 4,000? How am I going to know their track record for readmissions? How am I going to know their track record for malpractice suits? Now, If I devote a lot of time, I can probably dig this up in some states somehow. I don't have time for that. My back hurts. And I have a full-time job. I got a life to live. So my goal, sometimes when I'm in an Uber, and an Uber driver asks me what I do, I used to say the first 20 minutes of this, and he'd drive off the road, and it would be a problem. But I now say to him, have you ever used Zillow to buy a house? Oh, yeah. We looked at a house. We looked at Zillow. Well, don't you think there should be a Zillow for doctors and hospitals? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd be good. Now, ZocDoc sort of does that. There's people in that market trying to make that happen. But without Leapfrog, it ain't happening. Without someone pushing for transparency across the board, the consumer's never going to know as much about their back surgeon as they do their phone plan, or their lawn service, or the used car they just bought. What is wrong with that picture? So, the carrier, the provider, the consumer all need Leapfrog. And when you are talking to those parties, I would urge you to tell that story. It's a unifying thought. You know, insurance carriers don't have the highest NPS scores in the economy. It becomes a shock to some. But if you want to bash carriers, go ahead. But isn't a better conversation to be, shouldn't we have carriers have more information so when they build networks and pay claims, they know more what's going on? Everybody can benefit from the work that Leah is leading, which leads me to employers, which is what we are. 58, 59 employer groups, about 4.5 million people get their health care from the groups that are in our co-op. And there's two main reasons why we think the work that Leapfrog is doing is essential to what we're trying to do. The first is because we really do care about the people who work for our member companies, the person who works in the Marriott or drives the truck for Coca-Cola or is behind the counter at Walgreens or processing a claim for American Express. We want to send them to the right providers, the good ones, not the bad ones. Right? If you want to talk about, just forget about morality for a minute, which again in Washington that's easy. Forget about morality for a minute and just think about your P&L. If someone goes to a hospital for a knee operation and develops sepsis and survives but is in there for 11 days in the ICU, that's a really expensive problem. And it's Amex or Coca-Cola or Marriott pick up the bill for that. So they definitely benefit from a better result in the first place, and you can't figure out where the good results are versus the bad ones if you don't have the data, and you're not going to have the data without the work that Leapfrog does. That's the first reason. The second reason, and I think our friends in HR would agree with this, even with the pandemic still going, and it is, even with all the problems, the so-called return to work and who's going to work at home and who's going to work virtually and who's going to do this and who's going to do that, and the great resignation and inflation, all the rest of it, most HR leaders with whom I talk and listen to, their number one concern remains hiring and keeping great people to work for them. It's the top of their list. If you went to them and said, look, I can save you 30% of your health insurance spend and, sell you a product that will sing the national anthem in Swedish. They're not really interested in that until they know, well, what's this going to do to my employees? Are they going to like it? They're going to hate it. So I have a really narrow network. You can use one hospital in the whole state of Arizona. Well, President Biden's in Arizona today announcing that a chip conductor, a Taiwanese company, is going to build more chips in Arizona than they're supposed to. Their number one concern is getting highly skilled workers to come build those chips in the Tucson area. If an employer were to say you can only use Banner, a lot of those employees are going to say, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go work for someone else. So I've never seen an employer on their website who says, our most important concern is our profit and loss statement. We have these people working for us, but they're expendable. We really count about how much money we make for the shareholders. No one says that. What they say is, our number one asset is our employees. And I believe most of them really mean it. There's a few outliers, but When I talk about the Marriotts and the JP Morgans and the Amex, they mean it. They care a lot about the people who work for them. Well, what better way to show that than to get behind a group like Leapfrog? Because if one of those Amex call center employees' daughter needs an ear operation, don't you think that we'd want to let her know that who the great providers are in her area and who the not so great ones are? Look, most people don't think about their health care until they're sick or until they have a crisis. But when they do, it's like all they think about for a while. And what our members want to say to those family leaders is, yeah, here's some information that'll help you make a good decision about where your little girl ought to have that ear operation. If you want to talk the talk of caring about your employees, walk the walk. So without Leapfrog, none of this can happen. So my advice is that in a world where conflict in healthcare policy is everywhere over everything, it's refreshing to have a unifier. Leapfrog is that unifier. And we should be telling that story. Now, the crisis of spirit, I want to talk about for a minute, too. Because the real problem on crisis of spirit is it's discouraging because there's a lot more failure than there is success. Healthcare feels like a wilderness. Lee is a multi-decade veteran of this. A lot of the women and men in this room have felt this, that there's some great days. There's a lot of really bad ones, too, in healthcare. It's hard. There's a lot of really bad ones. And I choose the term wilderness because I've been doing some reading lately about the wilderness myth and how important it is to some of the basic philosophies and religions in our culture. The Prophet Muhammad encountered the wilderness of the caves of Satan. And much of the story in Islam about the struggle of Muhammad to succeed is based off how he handled that wilderness. Moses spent no time in the Promised Land, if you remember. He died before the Israelites got there. So he spent really from his very early manhood until his death in the wilderness. And the story of Moses is about how he confronted and dealt with the wilderness. John the Baptist. I'm an Episcopalian, which means that usually we meet at either golf courses or banks. But our priest this week talked about John the Baptist, who lived in and preached from and learned from the wilderness. And the point about this is, yeah, the wilderness is scary. It's harsh. It's tough, like healthcare. But it's also beautiful in some ways. And the wilderness reminds us there is something greater than ourselves. The wilderness reminds us the stars in the Arizona desert, the mountains in Salt Lake City, the Atlantic Ocean in New Jersey. The wilderness reminds us there's something greater than we are, whatever we call it, whatever we believe it is. And if you feel like you're a part of something greater, you do better. So the crisis of spirit, I think, is that too many people have become too discouraged that they're part of a daily push to get stuff done. Yeah, I got to get this. I've got to get the anesthesiology department to think about this in a different way. I've got to get the carriers on board before we initiate this project. I've got to get HR to think about initiating a weight loss program. It's hard, and it's not inspirational, but the result is inspirational. So at the age of 28, I was elected to what used to be called in New Jersey freeholders. We were called a lot of things, actually, but they're the county commissioners who run the county government. So I was 28 years old. I got elected for the first time, and I knew everything. I just had the world by the tail. And so I was assigned my first year on the board to the Public Works Department. And I was sworn in January, and we had a ferocious snowstorm the second week I was in, and we had traffic snarl. People couldn't get out of their driveways. We had hundreds and hundreds of angry constituents calling. So I, of course, decided we needed to drastically revamp our snow removal program. So I said to the Public Works Department head that I wanted him to gather his top 10 or 15 people, and I had prepared a slide deck. and wanted to walk them through ways I thought that we could radically improve the snow removal program. He is one of the kindest and best people I've ever met because he did me a huge favor, pulled me aside before the meeting started, and said, tell me again how many snowstorms you've handled in your life. And of course, the answer was 0, if you didn't count shoveling out my parents' driveway when I was a teenager. He said, maybe what we ought to do at the meeting is ask the guys, and they were all guys at this point, what they think. And so we did, and in fact, there's some really good ideas came out of it, and we improved the snow removal. I said very little. But I remember one thing in particular. To start the meeting, I went around the table and said, Fred, what do you do? Well, I plow snow. And Angelo, what do you do? Well, I spread the salt and the rock salt. And I said, Enrique, what do you do in the storm? He said, I make it possible for babies to be born, for people to get to school, and people get home to their families. And I said, would you say that again? Well, when it snows, I make it possible for babies to be born in the hospital. I make it possible for people to get home to their families and for people to get to school the next day. Enrique understood what the crisis of the spirit is about. He'd been out in a truck all night pushing snow around, which I had no clue the best way to do that. But I learned something from him that day I remember to this day. If you think about coming out of the wilderness of healthcare, if you think about why you're doing what you're doing, then it looks different. I don't want anyone else have happen to them what happened to Mrs. Burroughs. That's why I'm doing this. I don't want the Murphy family to feel like no one cares about the life that was stolen from their holiday table this year. I don't want the other priest that served with Father Gall and his sister to think that his life was in vain. And the reason this has worked, lots of things are going to happen tonight that wouldn't have happened had Leapfrog not done work it should. There will be babies born tonight, probably in this city, who weigh around 2 pounds, who will live and flourish. There are children who were diagnosed with childhood leukemia a year ago who are in full remission, where it would have been a death sentence just a couple of decades ago. There are people who will defeat the demons of addiction and no longer live on the street and start to live the humane life that they richly deserve because of the progress we've made in a lot of behavioral health areas. Not enough? So, you're not hauling stones up the mountain. You're building a cathedral. That's what we're doing. On your toughest days, that sounds like, yeah, okay. But when you have a discouraging day, remember that. Because that's the reason why this all matters. And at the end of the day, it makes you part of something bigger. You're a part of something very big and very good. I appreciate the work you do every day. I appreciate the fact that you came to listen to us and teach us here today as well. And I urge you to go back tomorrow and do even better. Thanks for your time and attention tonight.